Okay, hello everyone, and what do you know? It's another face cam video, one that I haven't really done in I think about a month or so, and it was on an old camera. I didn't have a webcam at the time, and setting up my camera was always a hassle back then since I didn't even have a tripod either, but now I have this webcam here to use for stuff like this, like reviews and stuff like that, so I can do that now. And I can still do my commentary videos at the same time, and I'm so glad I got this webcam today. And a few other things before I start. Happy leap year. Leap year happens once every 4 years, and it is leap year once again, and it's one of the most rare holiday pretty much that I can think of, so happy leap year, everyone. So anyways, I'm going to get back to music reviews. I've gotten a little bit more support for my music reviews that I've done from years ago even. A few more comments have showed up and everything. More views have been coming to those older videos, which is kind of surprising since they were made years ago. But I guess, you know, the views are coming back on those videos, so I might start doing these a little more along with my commentaries. So this one is going to be top 10 bands of the 80s. Now, the 80s was a decade of a lot of things, like the hair metal scene was going on, the punk scene was getting big, the glam rock thing was also getting big at the time. Glam rock and glam metal were getting big. Bands like Poison, Motley Crue, bands like that were getting big at the time. In the glam rock scene, the thrash metal scene, you had Metallica and Slayer, bands like them. And for punk bands, you saw a lot of bands like the Ramones even still had their fame. There was Operation Ivy and other bands like that starting up that started becoming famous throughout the 80s, both in North America and United Kingdom and all of Europe and Australia. And throughout this all, I think a lot of people made a lot of good memories from back then. I wasn't alive at the time, but a lot of the things I grew up on were from the 80s. A lot of the music I grew up on was from the 80s and 90s even, which we'll talk about the 90s in another video. But I grew up on a lot of 80s music, and whether it be from MTV to, you know, other just famous bands that happened to appear that friends of mine knew, and I got into them through that. But I've definitely grown up on a lot of 80s music, so. Alright, so let's get to number 10 now. Number 10 is actually Ministry. Now, this is a band that originally was actually supposed to be 80s synth pop music, but after their first album, they went on to more industrial music with the album Twitch, which wasn't really industrial rock or metal, but after that album, they became full-on industrial metal pretty much with their album Land of Rape and Honey, and that album had some really good songs on it. That's my favorite early album that they had for sure. And there was another one called The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste, which was also a very good album. Those two albums are definitely my favorite 80s Ministry albums, and definitely can make the list for number 10 spot on the my top 10 80s bands. Those two albums alone put this band on the list, and they definitely do talk about some dark stuff in their songs for sure. And, you know, some people can maybe question that, but, you know, I kind of like dark stuff from time to time that goes a little bit off the grid, a little bit against the grain, you know, for sure. So I kind of do like Ministry a lot for that aspect. They talk about things that really should be talked about, like a lot of horrible things going on in the lower class, drug addiction, or whatever else, you know, creates a little bit of awareness that, hey, this stuff is terrible, you really shouldn't do these things. So I kind of like them for that aspect too. And they were, of course, you know, a lot back then on drugs, but, you know, they encourage others not to do it, and that it's a terrible thing to be doing, and you don't want to be like them. Though most of them today I think are pretty much sobered up, so that's kind of a better thing for sure, is to focus on quitting before, you know, you're dead after the first couple of years of doing it. Because a lot of people, that is the case, you know, they overdose after 2 years even of constant usage, you know, or it's a lot of time even earlier than that they overdose. So drugs are never a good thing to be doing, kids, and don't try them. So, but still, Ministry, those two albums alone, definitely put this on the spot for top 10 or number 10 on my top 10 80s bands list. Okay. Alright, so number 9 is Corrosion of Conformity. Now, Corrosion of Conformity was more kind of like 80s, I don't know what you call them, like almost a thrash kind of band for sure, and they're definitely pretty thrashy back then, almost like hardcore punk pretty much, and thrash metal, kind of a mix between, and they definitely put out a couple good albums at first, that Blind being my favorite actually out of all of them. Deliverance is my second favorite out of pretty much all Corrosion of Conformity albums of all time. Now, Blind was one of those albums, definitely had the 80s thrash sound in it, which I definitely did really like. It was, you know, kind of reminded me of other thrash bands like Overkill, you know, Metallica, and I've always kind of liked that sound, and they definitely brought their own unique sound to the table when it came to that, and that's why I like Corrosion of Conformity so much. And I definitely do like their guitar work for sure that they do in their songs, whether it be the lead guitar or, you know, the rhythm guitar. The lead guitar definitely has some pretty like smooth solos in the songs that, you know, aren't like too complex, but definitely do showcase talent for sure, along with, you know, emotion, which is definitely a great thing to be doing. It's great to have that kind of combination. So that's why Corrosion of Conformity makes it number 9 on my top 10's 80s bands list. Number 8 is Metallica. Now, Metallica was pretty much the metal band of the 80s. That's literally how famous they became, even throughout the 80s, with, you know, their first 3 albums. Of course, Master of Puppets being pretty much the most famous out of them, and, you know, and Justice for All was even pretty famous, and definitely garnered a lot of attention throughout the metal community, the speed metal community. You know, all those scenes definitely were picking up on this and taking a lot of influence from Metallica. You know, there's bands like Slayer too, which of course were around at the time, but Metallica actually did manage to make something very unique out of it. They had definitely their own unique sound. You know, on the guitar especially, they definitely had their own unique sound with that. Kirk Hammett is definitely a very good guitarist, and, you know, James Hetfield even has a very unique rhythm guitar tone, which I do like a lot, and they definitely do have their own unique style, which definitely even still fits well for sure among the two. So their guitar work, I think, is, you know, great and adds a lot to the music in Metallica. And the bass as well. The bass also really adds to the sound in Metallica, which I definitely really enjoyed. And they definitely had a sound unlike any other at the time. There was a mix of like thrash metal, speed metal, with their own style pretty much in it, you know, whether it be with the vocals or the guitar, the bass. You know, they definitely had their own unique thing going at the time, and wrote some longer songs actually that were definitely worth the 8 minutes listening, and that's why Metallica is my number 8 spot on my top 10's 80s bands list. Now, number 7 is Judas Priest. Now, Judas Priest was definitely a very good band and a very important band to the 80s metal community, and I can kind of get why for sure, because back then they even wrote some really good songs like Breaking the Law, which was, I think, pretty much their most famous song, and the Screaming for Vengeance album in general is definitely a very good album as well. I love Screaming for Vengeance. It's my favorite Judas Priest album of all time by far, with songs like The Hellion or Electric Eye, to of course the most famous song in the album, You've Got Another Thing Coming. That's definitely a really good song, and pretty much this album in general is the perfect Judas Priest album, and definitely my favorite one. I like a lot of Judas Priest stuff in general. This one's definitely my favorite, and it showcased so much of how kick-ass an 80s metal band could be, for sure, you know. They were pretty much the most kick-ass 80s band I think I can think of, honestly, in the metal scene. And, you know, they took a lot of influence from punk bands as well, along with, you know, even other thrash bands. And they definitely had a very good guitar player, I must say, and a very good singer. And that's really why I like Judas Priest so much, because they can definitely make a song that really gets people with their fists up in the air and everything, you know what I mean? So that is why Judas Priest makes it to number 7. Number 6 is Operation Ivy. Now, Operation Ivy was actually a band that mixed a couple different genres together in the 80s, and punk rock, of course, being the most heavily shown out of all those. And there was lots of ska influences with songs like Bad Town and even Sound System, which is their most famous song. They only had one album which contained, I think, around like 20-some songs. And they had another EP called Energy, but I still can't seem to really find a good quality version of it. Though I've heard most of the songs on there, and even those songs sound great. And their Energy album was released in 1985. And there's so many great songs on this album that I listen to all the time. I listen to Sound System, I listen to Bad Town, I listen to Yelling in My Ear. There's so many songs I listen to all the time on that album. And I can even play a lot of the songs from that album on guitar at this point, and I think they're really fun to play on guitar. And they definitely had something really unique going at the time with mixing these two genres together and mixing that style of vocals, which I haven't really heard in any other punk band ever really use that kind of style of vocals, but I definitely think they're unique and interesting to listen to, and their lyrics are absolutely on point, and they've always been good at writing lyrics. You know, Tim Armstrong has always been a good lyricist and a good guitarist in all the bands he's been in, including Rancid and Operation Ivy. And Operation Ivy is definitely one of my favorite 80s punk bands, and there's a couple more that'll be on this list coming soon. So that is number 6 for my top 10's 80s bands list. Now, number 5 is Black Sabbath. Now, Black Sabbath was considered to be pretty much the first metal band of all time, and I'm pretty sure it is, actually. And Black Sabbath was one of those bands that really shook everybody up at the time, and everybody wondered, what the hell is this music? It's like satanic. And there were so many people who thought that at the time when it came out, but you know, there were lots of people getting into it at the same time because it was so rebellious and so against the grain and so like high in energy, but people really enjoyed it for all those reasons. And Black Sabbath were pretty much the pioneers of metal, for sure. And there were so many people who played it at parties back then. It was a good song to party to. There's so many good songs to party to from them. You know, like Paranoid was played a lot back then. And it was pretty much the first metal song I ever heard, for sure. You know, I wasn't around in the 70s and 80s, but I mean, Paranoid was one of the first metal songs I heard, for sure, because I heard it actually in my days, you know, in the 2000s. I heard it on, you know, a computer for the first time, and I thought it was quite interesting, for sure. And I was like, who's this? And then I looked him up and everything, found out all the info about him, and listened to a lot of their other material, and definitely really enjoyed them. I've listened to, I think, 3 or 4 of their albums in total, but, you know, even through those albums, I still think they're a great band, and definitely do deserve to be known as one of the greatest metal bands of all time. And Ozzy today, of course, I think he's still in Black Sabbath from what I've seen. You know, of course, he's doing his own solo material as well. And, you know, Dio, of course, you know, rest in peace to Dio. He was a great singer to the band as well. You know, people argued over that whole thing, but, you know, I think they were both great artists for sure, you know, in different ways. So I think they still both deserve the recognition they get. And that is why Black Sabbath is number 5 on this list. Number 4 is Black Flag. Now Black Flag was definitely one of the biggest punk bands of all time, and a lot. This one's known a lot among the older punk generation for sure, and even a lot of new people I know who are into that music know who Black Flag is, because they became such a big band out in the Southern California punk scene and really among the world in general. It's, you know, especially North America and the UK. And their first album was definitely a really hardcore album for sure, and there are lots of short songs in the album, which pretty much is what a lot of hardcore punk has to offer in it, you know, short sporadic songs that are really like, you know, fuck the world and all this shit in it, which, you know, it can be fooling around but at the same time kind of serious at the same time. So it was definitely something different to be doing. You know, bands like NoFX kind of did this too, you know, especially in the 90s. But Black Flag definitely was one of those bands that talked about, you know, serious stuff at times. You know, they like to really get their anger out in these songs, get their frustrations out in the songs. It's pretty much what hardcore punk is kind of about, almost a lot of the time, or just, you know, having a good time, just riffing out on the guitar, and, you know, just doing short sporadic songs to get people really pumping up and everything like that, which, you know, was definitely a good thing to be doing in the punk scene back then. Because at the time there were so many people that were frustrated with all sorts of things, whether it be school, work, you know, their government, whatever it may be. They were getting into bands like Black Flag and all that, and they definitely were one of the greatest hardcore punk bands of all time, I must say, and they deserve to be number 4 on the top 10 80s bands list. So number 3 is the Ramones. Now the Ramones, you know, believe it or not, they're definitely more unique than what I think most people think out there, you know. When they first started, you know, people thought, what the heck is this, you know, it's the most simplistic music ever, you know, it's the same lyrics, it's, you know, there's not much lyrics really in it, you know, but they use power chords and everything like that pretty much throughout almost the whole song. But they had a unique style of doing it. They made it upbeat and catchy, and they made it, you know, good music to either surf to, or, you know, skateboard to, you know, play at a party or something like that. And that's why people got into the Ramones a lot, and they wrote some stuff that was rebellious, they wrote some stuff that was, you know, catchy and melodic and, you know, up in tone, which I think was a good thing about them. Their first album definitely was the most revolutionary punk album of all time, you know, and I think a lot of people would agree with me on that one, that their first album definitely was pretty much the spawn of the whole punk scene. And I can play almost like all the songs in this album on guitar actually, because, you know, I've spent so much time listening to them and really learning them, and I must say they're definitely really fun to play, and really, you know, even fun to play and sing at the same time. So the Ramones had a lot of influence on me musically, and that's definitely why they're on the number 3 spot on this list. Now number 2 is All. Now All is actually, you know, not a lot of people may know about this band, but, you know, All was actually a kind of more of a side band to Descendents. They had different vocalists a lot of the time, you know, for each and every one of their albums. You know, they had a couple different singers, and, you know, it was pretty much all the members of the Descendents except for Milo. And there were a couple different singers that they've had, you know, for the first album. I can't remember what the guy's name was, but for the second album they had Scott Rayner, which he definitely was a great singer for sure. Now the first guy was actually called Dave Smalley. He's actually in Down by Law, I just remembered his name, and he definitely did a great job in their first album. Scott Reynolds was in, I think, 3 of their albums, and he definitely did a great job in those, especially All Rise Revenge. All Rise Revenge, I think, is probably my favorite All album of all time. Breaking Things was another one. They had a different singer, which I can't remember the name of, but he definitely did a great job too in singing in All. And all the albums that he did, even Problematic was a great album. He did a great job in All, and I think Scott Reynolds is more of, he did a better classic sound back then. They kind of moved a little bit more forward and progressed in their sound a little bit throughout the 90s, but in the 80s, Scott Reynolds was definitely, I think, perfect for the band All. And I definitely really enjoy what they did with their music. It was definitely shown, even when you listen to the demos of some of the songs from All Rise Revenge, and then you hear, the ones that are actually on the record, that there is definitely a lot of all sides mixed in from all the members. There's great musicianship going on in the band that made these songs what they are on the record. So that is why All is on the number 2 spot for top 80s bands, in my opinion. Now, number 1 is Descendents. Now, Descendents definitely was pretty much the most influential punk band on me ever, and there's a couple reasons for this. They make some of their songs are definitely pretty simple. Ones off their first album are kind of simple. They're just power chord progressions. I can pretty much play all of Hope now, and that's their most famous song, I think, actually. There's Suburban Home, which is a pretty easy song to play, and definitely a really fun one to play. And I definitely really enjoyed, jamming out playing these songs on guitar, and I really enjoy listening to them even still. And Descendants have so many great things about them that it's just countless. There's countless things I think that are great about them. And throughout the years, they've done all sorts of stuff with their sound. They've kind of modernized their sound a bit more throughout the past 20 years. And, they're not as good as they were back then, in my opinion, but they're still pretty decent, I think. And I still listen to their new stuff, even that they put out from time to time. Though it is very rare that they release a new record nowadays. But back then, they definitely were at the top of their game. And they made so many great songs back then. Whether it be on I Don't Want to Grow Up, or, Milo Goes to College, or, Enjoy Even was a decent album. And I don't even think they necessarily put out a bad record from what I've heard from all of them, I don't think they even necessarily put out a bad record, and I've heard pretty much all of them to date, and none of them really sound bad to me, so I definitely do enjoy the Descendents a lot, and they are definitely an important band to me and my musical style for sure, and they were a big influence on me, and that is why they're number 1. And I've done reviews on this band before on pretty much all the records at this point, and they've gotten some views, and I really appreciate you guys viewing those. And I don't really do individual album reviews too much anymore, but I thank you guys for all the support on those videos. So that is my top 10 80s bands ever. So if you guys know of a video topic you want me to do, whether it be top 10 90s bands, top 10 2000s bands, whatever, worst 80s bands, worst 90s bands, whatever, then let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys later. Peace.